in the far corner of the galaxy, where stars burned faint and the silence of space felt thick and endless. A mining crew on the moon of Carsus 7 made a discovery. No one could explain a signal buried deep under the moon's cracked surface, steady and pulsing like a heartbeat trapped in stone, coming from a massive object they couldn't scan or identify, only dig toward. As they drilled through the rock layer by layer, what they uncovered was not a mineral deposit or ancient ruin, but something far more enormous, giant metallic surface that stretched 4 kilometers in all directions, smooth, black, and strangely warm, despite the moon's freezing environment. And when the last layer of dust was cleared away, they saw a tan, enormous door embedded in the structure, sealed shut without any seams, Q symbols etched faintly into the metal, older than any known galactic language, unreadable, yet somehow feeling familiar, like a forgotten whisper in a dream. The Galactic Council was alerted at once, and within a week, a science vessel filled with the top researchers, diplomats, and security teams arrived to study what they now believed was not just a structure, but a ship, massive, silent, and dead. For thousands of years, maybe more, its design unknown to any species in recorded history. Probe after probe was sent in, but none returned. And every scanning device malfunctioned when aimed at the ship, as if the vessel rejected all artificial intrusion. Frustrated and increasingly wary, the council formed a human-led observation team, partly out of protocol and partly because no one else dared to go near it anymore. And that was when Mara Elliott, a young human xenolinguist barely out of training, joined the mission. Her job, supposedly simple, to study the symbols and report any patterns, even if it meant just taking notes and being quiet. But from the moment she saw the ship, something stirred in her, a strange pull she couldn't explain. And though she said nothing, she kept feeling like the ship was waiting for something or someone. On the 3rd day of the mission, while the others argued over energy readings and political implications, Mara wandered close to the surface, her hand brushing against the smooth metal, and in that instant, everything changed. The ground trembled lightly. Lights flickered on in a wide line across the ship's hull, and a low, deep hum began to rise, vibrating through the rocks beneath her feet, making everyone stop and stare in shock. The sealed door cracked open slowly, with no sound but the rush of stale air escaping from within, revealing a dim hallway that pulsed with soft blue light, clean and untouched by time. And though dozens of trained specialists stood nearby, none of them could enter the moment they tried. A barrier of invisible force blocked their way, sending one technician flying backwards when he pushed it too hard. Only Mara, still standing at the entrance, was able to take a step forward, and the force vanished, the lights ahead brightening as if welcoming her, drawing her in like a long-lost friend returned. Connells came shouting over comms, but the ship ignored them all. Its systems moved only with her steps, responding to her presence like it recognized her, as if her touch had reawakened something buried deep within its core. Inside, the halls stretched into darkness, lined with markings and strange technology that pulsed softly as she passed, casting shadows that twisted behind her like something watching, something remembering. And though she felt fear, it was not the kind that came from danger. It was the fear of uncovering something meant to be forgotten, something vast and alive. Outside, panic spread quickly, and debate turned into argument. How could an ancient ship of unknown origin respond only to a human? And what did that mean for the other species of the galaxy, many of whom had never trusted humans to begin with? But inside the ship, Mara felt the silence speaking to her, not with words, but with emotion, with memory, and with each step she took. She felt like she was walking deeper, not just into a machine, but into a story, one that had been waiting for her to begin it again. Mara Elliott stood at the edge of the glowing hallway, her breath shallow as the ship lit up ahead of her, responding only to her steps. While outside the ancient doorway, soldiers, scientists, and alien observers watched helplessly, confused and suspicious, unable to enter their tools and machines, failing to breach the invisible force that surrounded the ship like a protective shell, allowing only her inside. The air was strangely fresh, the walls smooth like stone but humming faintly, alive with a soft energy that seemed to flow with her heartbeat, guiding her deeper through wide arched corridors where every light followed her movements, shifting in color, casting long shadows that disappeared the moment she turned. She walked carefully, alert but curious, and soon entered a large chamber where the floor dropped into a circular pit filled with symbols glowing in blue and white, strange writing that seemed to move like water. And at the center stood a tall, black pillar, silent and still, surrounded by empty seats shaped like they were made for humans, yet covered in dust that suggested no one had sat in them for thousands of years. Her voice trembled as she tried to speak, asking if anyone could hear her, but the walls gave no answer, only the quiet hum of ancient systems awakening bit by bit. Then, as if drawn by instinct, Mara placed her palm against the pillar, and in a flash of light, the entire room came alive. The pit lit up like a starfield, and a holographic map of the galaxy bloomed above her, massive and spinning, with thousands of worlds marked across it, many glowing green, some in yellow, but too many pulsing red like danger signs. And in the corner of the map, a timer appeared, slowly counting down from a number she could not understand, the digits alien and cold. Her earpiece buzzed with static as the council tried to reach her, but the signal inside the ship was weak, and she could only hear broken fragments. Warnings to retreat, orders not to interact, but it was too late. Something had already noticed her presence. Behind her, a hidden panel slid open with a hiss, revealing a stairway downward into darkness. And though every logical part of her told her to stop, to wait for backup, something deeper urged her on, like the ship wanted her to see more. Meanwhile, outside, the alien observers grew uneasy, especially the Kaleri and the Vulcan, who whispered among themselves that the ship was a weapon and Mara was the trigger. And arguments broke out as council members accused each other of withholding secrets, while some even demanded that Mara be removed from the mission, forcefully, if needed. Back inside, Mara descended into the lower levels, steps echoing as the halls grew narrower and darker, until she reached a room filled with floating cubes, all turning slowly in the air, each one projecting scenes that flickered like memory's giant. Cities floating in space, ships shaped like birds flying into battle, in a race of tall, pale beings with eyes like hers, human in appearance, but regal, ancient, and surrounded by light. She watched in silence as one by one, the scenes turned violent, planets burned, stars exploded, and a strange darkness spread through space like a fog, devouring everything. While the tall beings stood and fought until one by one they fell, leaving only silence behind. One final cube floated toward her, glowing red, and when she touched it, her head spun with pain as images flooded her mind, memories that weren't hers, voice whispering words in a language she somehow understood, telling her of a war long ago, and a secret lost to time, one that could only be unlocked by the last bloodline. When she opened her eyes again, she was on the floor, the red cube gone, and the room darker than before, as if the ship had used much of its power just to show her that truth. She stumbled back toward the pillar chamber, shaken, her thoughts spinning. And as she reached the entrance again, the lights dimmed and a deep voice echoed through the air, not from a speaker, but from the walls themselves. A single sentence repeated slowly in ancient common. Only the air may awaken the heart. All others shall remain blind. Outside, the barrier grew stronger, resisting even energy-based tools now. And several alien leaders began to demand the use of force, claiming that the ship represented a threat to galactic peace and that humans, especially an untrained one like Mara, should not be trusted with such power. Tension rose fast, and Earth's representatives struggled to keep the council calm. But their words carried little weight as rumors of human control spread across the fleet. Mara, unaware of the full panic outside, sat beside the glowing pillar, her mind heavy with what she had seen, unsure of what she was supposed to do next. But knowing that something had been set in motion the moment she touched the ships, something she could not stop. She looked again at the map above, at the many red worlds blinking like warnings, and at the countdown slowly reaching toward zero, and wondered what would happen when it did. Was it a signal, a weapon, a gateway? And why, above all, had the ship waited for her? Mara Elliott sat beneath the floating star map, the red lights pulsing slowly above her like a warning heartbeat. The countdown still ticking in strange alien symbols, and though she didn't know what would happen when it reached zero, her instincts told her it would not be good. The ship had gone quiet again, but it wasn't asleep, was listening, watching, waiting, and she could feel it in every hum of the walls, every flicker of light that followed her movements like curious eyes. Outside the ship, things were falling apart as different alien factions argued over what to do next, some demanding the ship be shut down or destroyed. Others calling for peace, but growing more suspicious by the minute, especially the Kalari, who believed humans were never meant to wield ancient power, and the Vulcan, who sent stealth probes toward the ship only for them to vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but static and a faint signal that simply read, "Access denied." Inside, Mara explored further, driven by the feeling that the ship still had something more to show her. And deeper in its heart, she found a long corridor filled with etched false images, carved in strange flowing lines that shifted slowly when she walked past, not drawings, but living memories frozen in time, showing scenes of the past with frightening clarity. She paused at the first one, where she saw tall beings, clearly ancestors of humanity, standing before glowing temples, building machines that floated like birds of light, their eyes filled with peace and purpose, their cities stretching across stars. And for a moment it was beautiful, but the next image darkened, the skies turned black, and a great shadow spread across the stars, devouring ships, breaking planets, swallowing light itself. And this darkness had no form, just an emptiness, cold and endless, named only in a whisper carved across the wall, the silence beyond. Mara stared at the words, her heart pounding, because she had heard that name before, whispered in her dreams since entering the ship. And now she understood it wasn't just a story. It was history, and that darkness wasn't gone, only waiting. Further down the hall, another image showed the same ancestors fleeing, their ships burning, their home worlds lost, and in one desperate scene, a council of these ancient humans stood around a model of the very ship she was now inside, placing their hands on a central pillar, the same one Mara had touched before. The image faded into shadows, and a final message appeared below it in slowly shifting script. If the air awakens the ark, the silence shall stir once more, prepare. Mara backed away, shaken, her thoughts spinning. Had she just set something terrible in motion by entering the ship, or was she the only chance left to stop it? And as if to answer, the ship pulsed again, the lights turning orange, the countdown speeding up slightly, and a low sound like distant thunder echoed through the halls. She rushed back to the central chamber, only to find the pillar glowing again, and around it, strange energy forming a protective field as a deep voice echoed. Once more from the walls, intrusion detected, protocol defense initiated. Her heart sank. Something was trying to break in. Outside, the Kalari, frustrated by delays and fearful of human dominance, had launched a covert team toward the ship using stealth armor and silent thrusters, hoping to breach the barrier and take control. But the moment they touched the entrance, the ship reacted violently. Blue arcs of energy crackled across the gateway, freezing the intruders in place, suspending them mid-air in glowing stasis fields, while alarms rang across the council fleet. Panic broke out as everyone demanded answers. An Earth's ambassador tried to calm the situation, claiming Mara had no hostile intent. But the damage was done. Some now believed the ship was a weapon that humans were secretly using, and whispers of war spread quickly among the outer delegations. Back inside, Mara could feel the tension in the air. The ship was no longer just a mystery. It was becoming a center of conflict, and worse, it was responding to her thoughts, her emotions, linking with her mind in small ways, showing her flashes of stars, of ancient cries, of machines and battles and warnings too fast to understand. And she realized that the ship was not simply a machine, but a vault of memory, a fortress, and maybe even a last hope for something bigger than she could imagine. Then the central map shifted, and for the first time, she saw movement among the red-marked worlds. One of them blinked, then two more, then a dozen, showing signals rising from their surfaces, strange pulses that looked like replies to the ship's reawakening. The silence had heard, and it was waking too. Mara turned to leave, her legs shaky, but the ship locked the chamber. And a voice whispered again, this time softer, almost sorrowful. The war never ended, only paused. Mara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. She was not a hero, not a soldier, just a student who could read languages and was suddenly standing between an ancient thread and a galaxy, on the edge of tearing itself apart. And yet the ship had chosen her, not by accident, but by blood, by memory, by something she had yet to fully understand. She took a breath, stepped forward, and placed her hand back on the pillar, hoping for answers, and the lights shifted again. The countdown paused for a second, and a new path opened before her. This one marked not by light, but by shadow. Mara stepped through the darkened path that had opened behind the pillar, the lights soft and pulsing, almost like a heartbeat buried within metal. And as she walked, the hallway grew warmer, filled with low hums and distant clicks, as if the ship was speaking to itself in a language older than stars. She moved slowly, each step echoing, and her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear alone, but from the strange energy rising around her, brushing against her skin like wind, though there was no air moving at all. Deeper into the vessel she went, through narrow corridors that curved and twisted, past walls lined with strange pods that looked like they once held people, though now all were empty and silent, until she reached a wide, circular chamber that it was completely dark except for a single platform in the center, surrounded by floating strands of light that shifted in shape and color as she approached. Something waited there, and as soon as she stepped onto the platform, the floor lifted, gently taking her upward through a vertical shaft until it opened into a vast space filled with blue mist and spinning machinery. And standing at the far end was a figure not human, not alive, but something in between a humanoid projection of light and data. Its face smooth and without detail, and its voice calm and low as it spoke her name without being told. Mara Elliott, heir of the lost bloodline, we have waited for you. She stood frozen, unsure whether to answer, but the figure continued, introducing itself as Vale, the last command interface of the Ark vessel, a ship built not for travel or war, but for survival, seed of memory, knowledge, and warning created by the last of an ancient human-like race to escape the collapse brought by the silence beyond. Vale told her that long ago, humans had not started on Earth, but had fled there after the war, their minds and history wiped clean to protect them, and that the Ark had been sent to wait near the edge of the galaxy for a signal to rise again either. From danger or hope, and Mara's presence had triggered both. Stunned, Mara tried to understand what this meant. And Vale explained that when she touched the pillar, the Ark verified her DNA, confirmed her link to the ancient line, and activated the awakening protocol, a chain of events meant to prepare the galaxy for what might come if the silence returned, because it never truly died, only slept, and now it stirred once more. Mara asked about the countdown, and Vale answered with a projection that showed the red-marked worlds beginning to pulse faster, a sign that enemy signals were reactivating, perhaps sentinels or probes waking to seek the source of the Ark's return, and that once the countdown reached 0, the ship's full systems would awaken its engines, weapons, memories, and defenses, but only if she allowed it. Mara hesitated, knowing that activating a warship of this size would be seen as a threat by the Galactic Council. And already, the Council was fracturing, with some members believing humans were trying to claim ancient power, while others feared the Ark was a weapon that would restart old conflicts. Outside the ship, the situation grew worse. Alien ships were now in standoff formation around the Ark, some readying weapons, others sending warnings, while Earth's fleet begged for time to negotiate, claiming Mara was only exploring, not controlling. And back inside, Mara felt the weight of a decision no one had trained her to make, because if she gave the command, the Ark would rise, and the galaxy would never see her the same again. But then Vale showed her the last image, a forgotten recording from the ship's builders, tall humans standing together, placing a child into stasis, whispering that one day, here, her kind would return and finish what they had started. And the final words carved into the wall behind them were simple and cold: prepare or perish. Mara looked at the figure of Vale, then at her own reflection in the polished floor. Her face pale and tired, but steady, and she knew she had no choice anymore. The moment she stepped onto the ship, she had been chosen, not by power, by fate and blood and memory, and now she had to act. She placed her hand once more on the interface panel, and Vale's form flared with light, announcing calmly, "Warden authority, confirmed awakening protocol initiated." Okay. And instantly the room shook as deep engines powered up for the first time in thousands of years, the ship's frame humming with energy, and its outer hull beginning to shift and unfold, revealing towers, weapons, and shield generators that had been hidden beneath rock and metal for ages. The Ark began to rise slightly from the moon's surface, lifting dust and debris in waves as gravity shifted, and outside, panic erupted among the fleets as warning alarms blared. Some ships moved back in fear, others locked onto the Ark with targeting systems, and a few even opened fire, but their weapons were stopped by a shimmering blue field that appeared around the Ark like a second skin, untouched and unbothered by modern weapons. Then a signal burst from the Ark, not a threat, but a message sent in every known language. "This vessel is under human command, authorized by ancestral protocol, activated for galactic defense. Stand down or bear witness." Across the council, reactions varied. Some were furious, others stunned, and many simply afraid, because the sight of the Ark rising, its size dwarfing even the largest modern cruisers, was a reminder that something old and powerful had returned, and no one could predict what would happen next. Inside, Mara stood quietly, surrounded by systems that now waited for her next command. And Vale spoke softly, "The eyes of the stars are upon you. What you do next will echo for lifetimes." And she knew he was right, because the galaxy was watching, but so was the silence, and it was coming. The Ark hovered above the moon's surface, its engines silent but steady, ancient power pulsing through its massive frame like a sleeping beast, slowly opening its eyes. And all around it, the fleets of the Galactic Council stood in tight formations, weapons charged, shields raised, and nerves stretched thin. Within the Ark's command chamber, Mara Elliott stood alone before the glowing interface, her heart pounding in her chest, surrounded by systems too advanced to fully understand, yet somehow familiar, dare, as if her very blood remembered how to guide them. Vale, the ship's AI, stood nearby in the shape of light and shadow, watching her closely as the last pieces of the awakening protocol completed, unlocking vaults of data, defense systems, and star maps long hidden. Outside, Chaos Brood Council delegates shouted over each other on secure channels, blaming Earth, blaming each other, some demanding the Ark be destroyed, others begging for more time to think. But the rising fear was clear no one trusted. The idea of a single human controlling something so powerful. Not after centuries of uneasy peace, and certainly not when the galaxy's most dangerous mystery, the silence, was now stirring from its ancient sleep. Earth's fleet tried to defend Mara's actions, explaining again and again that she was chosen by the ship, not trained or ordered. Cues, but many alien leaders refused to listen, convinced that this was a human trick to gain power over the rest of the galaxy, and as arguments turned into threats. One Kalari warship broke formation and fired a warning shot, a bright beam that struck the Ark's outer shield and fizzled into nothing. The act shattered the already fragile trust in the area, and more ships locked onto the Ark with weapons charged. Inside, alarms whispered through the corridors, and Vale turned to Mara with calm urgency, stating, "This is the last stand of reason. Diplomacy is falling apart, and logic is crumbling under fear." Mara felt the truth of those words deep in her chest. But she didn't want to fight, not against the Council, not against anyone, so she opened a channel, her voice shaking but steady, and she broadcast to every ship around her, telling them she wasn't trying to rule, wasn't trying to awaken a weapon, how to prepare for something worse, something ancient and returning, and that if they destroyed the Ark, they would be destroying their best chance of surviving what was coming next. For a moment, there was silence and no ships moved. No voices answered, just a frozen tension so thick it was hard to breathe. But then, several smaller fleets slowly powered down their weapons, unsure but willing to wait, while others grew angrier, shouting that this was a manipulation, that she was stalling to bring reinforcements. And the Voltan commander issued an ultimatum: surrender control or be removed by force. Vale quietly informed Mara that if 3 more ships locked weapons, the Ark's defense grid would activate on its own, triggering a system designed not to attack, but to neutralize threats with disabling pulses. But even that would be seen as an act of war. Mara's hands hovered over the interface, sweat dripping down her neck, her mind racing for a solution that didn't end in fire. And then, in a desperate move, she asked Vale to show the Council the memories, the history of the silence, the fall of the ancient race, and the purpose of the Ark not as a threat, but as truth. Vale hesitated, then activated the ship's outer projectors, and across the space between the fleets, a massive hologram formed. A memory played in the stars, showing cities falling into shadow, ships vanishing into black clouds, entire systems going dark, and the final creation of the Ark as the last hope of resistance. The vision lasted only a few minutes, but it left a heavy silence in its wake, and on the bridge of every ship, commanders stood frozen, shaken by the scale of the enemy, and by the quiet knowledge that the silence was not a myth. Just as some began to lower their weapons again, warning signals rang out from the edge of the system, unidentified signals entering real space, faint and slow, but spreading fast across the long-range scans, like ripples of static in the shape of ships. Mara turned to Vale, who confirmed in a cold voice, "They have found us." The silence approaches. The red lights on the star map pulsed faster, and the countdown reached its final minutes, ticking toward a moment the Ark was never meant to see alone. The threat of the Council fleets seemed small now, almost forgotten. But the damage had already been done. Some ships panicked and fled, while others tried to hold formation, torn between fighting the Ark or turning to face the unknown. And as confusion grew, Mara took a breath and made her choice. She activated the Ark's full signal beacon, sending out a wideband call to any ancient systems that might still exist. Forgotten ships buried on moons, silent satellites waiting for a voice they remembered. And the call echoed across the galaxy like a flare in the night. Vale confirmed the message had been sent, and faint pings began to return. Some near, some far, all responding to the heir's command, all waiting to rise again. The final seconds of the countdown ticked down, and Mara placed both hands on the core panel as Vale asked one final question. Are you ready to be the voice of the lost, the shield of the living? And though fear clawed at her, she nodded, knowing there was no turning back. The countdown hit 0, and the Ark roared to life, its hull shining bright as hidden systems unfolded, its engines lighting up like small stars. And in that moment, every ship around it saw the truth, not a weapon rising to destroy, but a fortress waking to protect. And in the vastness of space beyond them, the shadows of the silence finally arrived. The stars around the Ark dimmed as the silence arrived, not in the form of a fleet, but as drifting black shapes that swallowed light itself, their forms shifting like shadows wrapped in metal, silent and slow, yet filled with cold purpose. And the moment they entered the system, every sensor failed to read them fully, as if they were not completely part of this universe, flickering between real and something else. Mara Elliott stood at the heart of the Ark, her hand still pressed to the glowing core, her mind connected to the ship. And through that link, she felt the fear and tension growing across the galaxy, voices shouting in panic, ships scattering, orders clashing with desperation, and above it all, the heavy silence of the enemy pressing in like the deep cold of space. Vale stood beside her in his glowing form, his voice steady but tight, saying only, "They remember us." And as he spoke, the first of the enemy ships opened its hull, unleashing a wave of black drones that poured through the system like ink in water, moving faster than anything should, reaching toward the Ark and the remaining Council fleets with deadly speed. The Ark's outer defenses activated instantly, firing beams of pure white energy that cut through the darkness, slowing the drones but not stopping them completely. And Mara could feel the ship adjusting, reacting, learning from every strike, as if the Ark itself was remembering how to fight. The Council ships that had stayed behind now faced a choice: flee and survive for a little while longer, or fight beside a human and a forgotten relic of war. And slowly, one by one, began to form up around the Ark, not fully trusting, but unwilling to face the silence alone. Earth's fleet took the lead, charging into the incoming swarm, firing with everything they had, and for the first time in centuries, different species fought side by side, not for control or power, but for survival. Inside the Ark, Mara's connection deepened, and she saw more than just the systems. She saw the memories of those who had once lived here, heard their voices as they built this ship, felt their sorrow as they fled their dying worlds, and their final hope that someone, someday, would return to finish what they could not. And now, she was that someone. The ship responded to her thoughts, unlocking deeper levels of command, revealing ancient weapons hidden within its massive wings, shields that adapted to each attack, and a field generator that slowed enemy movement like thick air, giving the Council ships a fighting chance. But even with all of that, the silence kept coming, and it became clear that this was only a scouting force, not the full strength of what waited beyond the stars. Then, from deep space, new signals appeared, not enemy, but allies, as old beacons, long silent, lit up across the stars. And one by one, other R-class vessels began to respond to Mara's call, rising from moons, gas giants, even the hearts of dead planets where they had slept for thousands of years. Each one different in design, but all bearing the same glowing mark, the crest of the ancients, the mark of the last hope. Mara's heart lifted as these ships joined the battle, massive and graceful, their weapons lighting up the void, turning the tide for the first time. And when the enemy realized it was no longer alone, it pulled back slightly, regrouping, but not retreating. Vale informed her that the silence would now send more, not just drones, but ships that thought, that learned, and that could not be reasoned with, because they had no desire to speak, only to erase. The Orcs' systems paused faster, and Mara felt the weight of command pressing down on her, but she stood firm, sending orders to the new Orcs, guiding them into formation, creating a wall between the enemy and the remaining civilian systems behind them. Across the galaxy, more species began to respond, some skeptical, others desperate, all realizing that something far worse than political fear was now knocking at the edge of existence. And even those who once opposed the Ark now sent messages of unity, asking how they could help. Vale projected the new movements of the enemy, and the map showed dozens of red points blinking into view, a slow storm gathering, not yet here, but coming. And when Mara asked how long they had, he answered quietly, "Not long enough, unless we stand now." With every second, she felt herself changing, not just learning the Ark, but becoming part of it, her mind clearer, her thoughts faster, and her voice stronger. And when she spoke to the fleet, she did not sound like a student or a frightened girl, but like a commander of old, telling them the truth, that the silence had returned, that the ancients had built these ships not to destroy, but to protect, and that the only chance they had was together, as one wall, one purpose, one voice against the dark. Her words reached them, and though fear still lived in every corner of their hearts, ships began to move into place, old grudges set aside, and from deep in the void, the largest of the enemy shapes emerged, a ship like a moving storm, wrapped in black lightning, its presence shaking the very sensors that tried to read it. Vale looked at her and said, "This is where we decide if the future has light." And with no more hesitation, Mara gave the command, and the battle truly began. Beams of energy tore through the dark, missiles arced through space, shields flared and failed, and everywhere, light and shadow clashed in silence. But for the first time in 1,000 years, the ancients had returned, not just in steel and fire, but in blood, in choice, in a human who stood between the stars and said no more. And as the silence pressed forward, seeking to erase everything, it found not silence in return, but resistance, and in the center of it all, the Ark stood like a beacon, and Mara Elliott stood at its heart, the last heir of a forgotten people, the first voice of a new age. And though the battle was not yet over, the war had finally begun,